sound better.
Hey guys, it's Josh with WA Production here. I'm really excited to show you our latest artist signature plugin, XTT, that we made with Vinai. Super stoked on this one. Honestly, it does so much of what I do already in my mixing and mastering process and puts it into one plugin. So it just makes things so much easier and quicker. And it's so powerful and has so many awesome features. Today, what I'm going to do is go through the process of mixing and mastering a track just using XTT. I've put XTT on basically every track here. A couple of them I just put it on the group, and I'll play you what it sounds like without XTT, and then I'll go through each different track and group and the master channel and show you what I'm doing with it, use some presets, tweak them a little bit, and show you the power that XTT has to take your track from sounding decent, but maybe a little flat, maybe not sounding with that professional quality that you need. And then I will kind of show you how to get it there with XTT. So let me just play a little bit of this track from the beginning without any XTT turned on. Okay, I'll stop it there for now. I think you get the idea. So this is from one of our construction kits. It's already clearly been processed. It's not a completely raw, unmixed track, but I'll show you how we can kind of take it to that next step with XTT. From my perspective, I think it could be a little punchier, a little bigger sounding, and XTT will help us get there. So I'm going to start on the master chain. Some people prefer to do this last. I like to at least be using the technique of mixing into the limiter at a certain point in my mix, since this is already a little prepped. You know, we're not doing a bunch of EQ. That's already done. At this stage in the mix, I'll typically at least throw a limiter on the master chain so that we are now mixing our tracks individually into the limiter, knowing what the limiter, how it's going to color our track, rather than putting it on at the last step and then kind of maybe being a little surprised about how it changes the way our track sounds. So I'm going to turn on our mastering XTT here. So XTT is really awesome because it can be used for all sorts of different things. It has all these different presets. So you can tell by the presets that we put together that, you know, it can be used on bass, it can be used on stabs, it can be used on chords, it can be used on drums like your kick. It can be used for mastering. It can be used on all sorts of different stuff. So, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say that typically I would throw it on every single channel in my mastering process and my mixing process, but you can, and it can save you a lot of time and do a lot for you. So with XTT, its main purpose is a multi-band compressor. But it's more than that because it does both upward and downward compression. Upward compression means that it will take your quietest parts of the track, of your sound, and push them up. Anything below a certain threshold will get pushed up. That's great for bringing out the tails of sounds or bringing up the reverb or ambiance of a track. And then downward compression is the more typical compression, which will push down anything that goes above a certain threshold. So that's good for taming sounds that have a lot of dynamic range. That maybe, you know, it's always good to have some dynamic range in your track, but too much can have a little bit too much variety in your amplitude of your sounds. And so this can help make it punchier, beefier, and all of that. And then you can have this macro control of the time, which will increase or decrease the attack and release time together. So it's good to just kind of tweak that. And then if you want to get really into the minute details, each band actually has these individual settings that I'll go into in a little bit if we need to on certain tracks. So we'll see. Each band can be adjusted in terms of where it is on the frequency spectrum, and how wide it is, how narrow it is, and then obviously this is to adjust the threshold. So basically how much that compression is going to affect that band. So let's have a listen with this turned on. This is just the Mastering Glue bass preset. All right, so I'm liking overall how that sounds. As you could see, I can bypass the plugin really easily using the XTT logo button here. And what's really awesome with that too is that we've developed the plugin in such a way that when you click that, there's never going to be any clicks. A lot of times we find with plugin bypass buttons, I guess, there might be like a click sound or something that like hurts your ears when you do that, but it's super smooth with XTT. So that's a good way to just kind of see, is this plugin improving the sound, or is it making it worse, or whatever? Sometimes it might not fit the track you're trying to use it on, and that's fine. So overall, I like that. I do think it sounded probably better when it was parallel mixed. Again, XTT doesn't have to be the only plugin in your chain. Maybe you throw a limiter on afterwards if you feel like you still want to do more. But I thought that, it was making it beefier, making it punchier. I like that, but it kind of, at a certain point, there was a little too much bass coming out of that kick, and it was getting a little too heavy on that end. So let's just hear how it sounds with 50% mix. Okay, as a start, I really like that. So let's go into the individual tracks now. So I'll start with my drums that I have up here. Let's just solo these real quick so you can hear how it sounds. All right, I'm gonna just loop this section where the drop is happening, because I like to start there, since, as you probably all agree, the drop is often the most important part. So let's just get those drums sounding as good as possible. So I'm going to just turn on my Vinai XTT, and I'm starting with the Vinai starting point preset. And the reason for that is that since this is a drum bus, basically a whole mixed drum track, there isn't a specific preset for that. There's some that detail kicks and that kind of thing, but I want to just kind of start from a more basic point and see where that goes. It's a good starting point, which is why it's called that. So let's hear how it sounds with that on. All right, I like that a lot. I think what I might do is tune down the upward compression a little bit. I think it helps, but I think that it's kind of dragging on those rides and those cymbals a little more than I'd like it to. So let's just have a listen to it now. All right, so one cool feature that is pretty unique to XTT, I haven't seen another plugin that does this, is this link option right here. What it does is it actually links your input and your output gain, so that when you push one up, the other one goes down. What's cool about that is that oftentimes when you're loading a plugin and affecting a sound, it will sound better just because you've increased the volume. And so what this will do is, well, either it'll sound better or you'll kill your ears because you'll put this plugin on and then it'll like be crazy saturating or doing something to the sound that just like increases the volume tenfold. And so what this does is that you can push it harder into XTT by increasing the input gain, and you can balance that out by decreasing the output gain. So let's just play with that real quick. So what I want you to take a look at and pay attention to is the real-time graphical feedback here. You can see the pink section, which is basically what is changing between the input and the output. All right, I think it's sounding pretty good there. The last thing I want to do personally, because it's not necessarily, when you do this, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to end up at the exact same volume that it was when you before you put XTT on it. So what I want to do is just make sure that I'm not messing up my whole mix by increasing the volume of one single track, more than I'd like to. So I'm just going to go back and forth bypassing a little bit and then just make sure that my volume is remaining the same. You just want the quality of the sound to be better, and the XTT will be doing that. All right, I think that's pretty good. So let's move on to the bass. So we've got this plucky bass layer here. And of course, for that one, I've picked our Bass Stabs Focus preset. So let's see how that sounds. So right off the bat, you're going to hear a massive difference there. So what's really cool with XTT is all the different things that it does. So of course, we've talked about the upward and downward compression, and you can adjust that using the time and get really into the details of each band down here. But with its limiter function also, built into the limiter is also some saturation. And so it's a very clean saturation sound. It's not going to cause problems in your mix, but it can add a lot of character to that sound, as you can hear it doing here. You can also choose by clicking this arrow, if, let's say, especially on like your master, you want to get that limiter pushing much harder, you can boost the signal into the limiter as well. So let's refine this. I think, I am probably going to have to tone it down a little bit so that the bass is not now the loudest thing in the track. But let's have a listen. And one thing that's key when you're mixing is to not only listen in solo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and forth between solo and between, listening in context of the entire track, because you can make something that, like, if I was just listening in solo, I might just leave it how it was in the first place after putting on this preset because it sounded so good. But I have a feeling that when I listen in context, that might be a little too heavy, too aggressive, and it overshadows the rest of the track. So let's just listen to it in context as well. All right, cool. So you'll notice that I did adjust the input and output gains so that I felt it was at a better level. And then I toned down the high mids and the highs a little bit because while I like the pluckiness that brought out, I thought that now the high end was a little too much and overshadowing some of the other elements. So let's listen in solo again. So it is much pluckier. It's got much more high end. It's sounding a lot more aggressive, and I think it's sounding good. But let's just listen one more time in context. All right, and if you notice there, I felt that it could go a little bit quieter just to fit in the mix a little bit better. And instead of leaving link on, I turned it off just so that, because I've already decided I really like how everything sounds, I just want to turn down the volume a little bit. I wanted to turn off link so that I wasn't adjusting any other, parts of the character of the sound. And so with that, I'm pretty happy with how that's sounding. So let's move on to the next one. We've got the Growl and Metal Wobble here is what it's called. All right, let's go to a part where there's more of it. All right, so that's already a pretty aggressive sound. So let's hear what our bass saturator preset does to it. Wow, that sounds dope. All right, so I really like what it's doing. Again, kind of similar to the one before. I feel like it might be a little too loud, a little too much maybe for our mix, but let's hear it in context. All right, so there, I was working with the link mode. It was sounding good, but overall, just the volume is too high. So I wanted to reduce the output gain on its own. And then what I noticed too, I felt, you have to understand everything in context. With our master preset that we put on, that already increased the subbiness of our track. And then putting this on, which is the bass saturator, I felt it was adding a little more subbiness to this specific layer, which kind of when in combined with each other, I felt was a little too much. So I wanted to, kind of reduce that bass down a little bit more. Okay, I'm liking how that sounds. Let's hear it with and without XTT. Okay, all right, I'm digging that. I think it's sounding good. I think it's the right volume, so let's move on. Okay, so now we've got our watery bass layer. Okay, so I've put on our bass stabs focus preset here. One thing to note pretty much with all multi-band compressors is that if there's a little bit of noise in your track, it might bring that up. So one way to get rid of that is to just throw a quick gate in front of there so that it's not picking up those super quiet sounds. So let me do that. I'll put it super low. And now we probably won't hear that noise that was picked up. All right, so yeah, that's if you guys didn't know that, with multi-band compressors that are doing upward compression, if there's a little bit of noise in the recording, it's going to bring up that noise, which is usually not what you want. So a gate is a quick way to fix that. So that's one thing we fixed there. And so now let's have a listen here Let's compare the two again in context, with and without. Okay, so in this instance, this is meant a little bit more to be a subby bass. We already have so much high end. We've got those growls. We've got some cool stuff doing plucky things. I feel that I'd rather tone down the high end a little bit in this one. So let's adjust that. You don't want to have too many elements occupying the same space in the frequency spectrum. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. I toned down the top end a little bit here, a little bit of the low end, because we do have some other sub bit, kind of the same reason I was talking about in the last one. We've got some other elements down there as well. One thing I want to try here and see how it sounds is we've got this cool mid-side tilt function here. While I don't want there to be too much high end, I feel like this might be a sound where if the bit of high end that we leave in is a little spread out, a little wider, it might make the track sound a little bigger and fuller. So what you can do is increase or decrease specifically on an individual band how wide or narrow it is. So let's just try that. Okay, I like that. I think that's a little too much, but you hear how much wider that sounds, and we haven't made the sub and low end wide. You pretty much never want to do that in most cases. But now, that's a fun way and a great way that I use a lot to take, a lot of times, especially in electronic music, you have a bass sound that is not just a bass sound. Your bass might reach the entire spectrum like this one does. I mean, it's not quite as loud at the high end, but it's filling up the whole spectrum. And so sometimes you might want your bass sound to sound wide. What do? You don't want to actually spread out the entire sound, because then your sub will be wide, which is like the opposite of what you want. So what you can do is just make the high end of it wide, so it gives that entire sound a more wide sound without causing, mixing and just problems in general. So I'm going to tone it down a little bit, but I like what it did. You hear how narrow that is compared to this? If not, put on some good headphones and listen. That'll make it clear. All right, moving right along. So let's jump into the chords over here that we have. All right, and I've got this stack the layers compression preset, so let's hear how that sounds. All right, so just right off the bat, I can tell you, even without listening in context, that while I like what it did there, I like that it brought out the lushness of the sound. I do think that it's got a little too much, sorry, just adjusting my headphones there. It's got a little too much of that attack, that plucky high end. There's a few things we can do to adjust that. Let's tweak the time a little bit. Where am I? Here, right? Sorry, there we are. Okay. All right, that already made a big difference in my mind. So what we're doing there, while I felt that it wasn't doing too much of what I wanted by using the macro time control because it was affecting everything else also, and I really like that it was bringing out the length of the tails, and I didn't want to mess that up. What I did is individually, I reduced the attack on the higher frequency end because what that does is it makes the compressor react more quickly, which means that it'll react on the attack on that transient and push it down. If you have an attack time that's longer, it's going to basically stay off until after the transient has played and then push down the rest. And so that I think helped a bit. What I'll also do is adjust just the threshold of these high-end parts so that it pushes it down more. All right, I'm liking how that sounds. Now let's listen in context. Okay, it's subtle because those chords are kind of background layer, but I do like that it gives it a little bit more thickness and presence in there, but it's sounding good to me there. Let's move on to this arpeggio. Sorry, wrong one. That's a cool sound. I would love if it sounded a little brighter and wider. So let's see what we can do with this melodic synth enhancer preset. That's really cool because it's now also accentuating this phaser effect. I think it's more of a phaser effect that that I didn't even hear in the original. It's super mild in the original version, but when you turn on the preset, it's really cool. It gives it a lot of movement. I think the high end's a little harsh, so I'm going to tune that down a little bit. One of the hard things with mixing is that you can make a sound so good individually that it's like, man, I don't want this to just be a background sound, but that's what this is. It's a background sound. So as much as we've got a lead in here, so we can't have that background sound outdo the lead and cover it up. And so I am going to keep it pretty low and in the background, even though I love how that sound is sounding. One thing I might try is kind of the similar trick of what we did with the bass is kind of give that high end a little bit of width. So let's see how that sounds. All right, I like that a lot. It's sounding cool. All right, moving on. We've got I think this is our lead. Oh, it's in the drop, that kind of wobbly lead. All right, so we've got our top lead Widener track. I think that this sounds a little narrow. It could be a little bigger. And we've got that preset on here, so let's hear how it sounds. If you can hear there, we've got a little bit of that noise issue, so let's do the same thing we did with the last one. All right, that's sounding pretty good. A little harsh, and I'll want to fine tune this in context, but let's just get the harshness down a little bit. All right, and one thing I haven't done yet, but you can also adjust the individual volumes of each individual band here. So that basically the output of each individual band, obviously adjusting compression adjusts the volume, but it does more than that. It's also reducing the dynamic range and increasing how much the compressor acts. So if you want to simply adjust the volume, you can do that with this knob down here. All right, I think that's sounding pretty good. I wouldn't really do much more to it. I think that that's a case where despite it being such a focal point of the track, if you make it too up front and too forward, there's so much cool stuff happening in this track that it's going to just overpower everything, and it's not going to sound as complete and glued together of a song. So, all right, so now we go into the drop chords. For the chords, I've just put XTT on the actual group because there's a few different chord layers. I'll play them separately real quick. All right, so to save time, I'm putting them on the group. You can always do them individually as well, but just wanted to do it on the group because XTT is also a great way to kind of glue layers together. So for this one, I'm going to use our Stack the Layers compression preset. So here's how it sounds without it. And now with it. And again, we've got a little bit of noise, so let's get that out of there. All right, I like how that's sounding, a little bit brighter, a little bit wider, a little bit fuller. Now let's try it, try and bypass it and just make sure that it's exactly how we want it. Okay, I just wanted to dial in that high end a little bit. I felt that there was a little too much. When you have too many elements that all have high end, it can build up to be a lot very quickly. When you have a bunch of elements with very high airy frequencies, when you have too much of that, it can get a little too harsh and overbearing and really not sound good altogether. It might sound good individually or a couple of them, but when you put 10 different elements that all have that high end, it can sound a little much. So it's important to listen, like I said, and like we've been doing, in context. So I think that's cool. I mean, I think that sounds great for putting these three layers together and getting them to sit nicely together. So let's move on to our final group here, to our leads group. This is another one that I've grouped together. So let's hear them individually real quick. These three are the ones that play together the most often, so let's listen. A few interesting sounds, and then we've got a fourth one in the group over here that plays on its own. So that's, the one that plays during the verses, essentially. I'm going to start over there just to hear how that sounds. If I'm doing a full mix, I might separate these out a little bit, like these three, they play together, so I might keep those together and then put this one on its own. But, to save a little bit of time, I'm just going to do it this way for now and do what I think sounds best for all of them. So we've got this lead widener that we used on one other element already. So let's hear how that sounds on this one. Okay, I like the width. I like the clarity of it. I do think it sounds a little harsh on the high end, so I'm going to push down those high end frequencies a little bit more. I also don't think our lead needs that much low end, so I'm going to have it pushed down on those as well. You hear how much crisper that sounds and how much more like a lead it sounds than it did before. Let's hear it in context. Is it just me, or does that sound so much better? It does, at least in my opinion. So let's move over to this part where we have the other layers of the lead group. All right, so it's affecting it the same way. It's crisper. It's not sounding too harsh to my ears like it did a little bit before, and it's just sounding like a more complete lead sound. So let's hear it in context. All right, I'm loving that. I think it sounds great. So that's pretty much every layer. So what I'm going to do is have a quick listen through to the entire track, and we'll see how it sounds with all of these different versions of our XTT plugin, all these different presets, all these different adjustments on pretty much every layer, as well as the master. So let's hear how it sounds. All right, guys, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for watching this. I hope that this helped you kind of get an understanding for how you can use XTT in a real world setting. XTT by WA Production and Vinai is now available for sale online on waproduction.com. Please go grab your copy. You can get the free demo if you want to try it out before you commit to buying it. But it's really awesome. It can be used in every production, and these presets sound so good just as they are, and you've got so much power to tweak it as much as you need to. So go out, go make some great music, and thank you so much for watching today. Have a good one.